anticipated event to open the gates of AQ. Now, I fully expected there to be more than just a little bit of drama on many servers, because a lot of people want one of these buggy boys. This is a chance for a grown person to now no life a game for a couple of days killing bugs in a desert to get a mount that they wish they'd gotten 15 years ago but didn't have the connections or time to do so. Or at least that's the way it seemed. Except this time around it's on an actual Blizzard server, so the stakes are much higher since, well, this mount will be there forever really, and you get a nice title in TBC as well. That's pretty cool. I have to say, when I did my war effort preparation, it turned out that I didn't exactly make the most well-informed decision. See, after having done so much Diamond East, I thought, hey, why not smelt all of this thorium ore into bars, then I can use that as my main turn-in come Phase 5. What I neglected to check was how many thorium bars were needed, which turned out to only be 24,000. I had about 1,800. Needless to say, the hand-in for thorium bars was done in little over 10 minutes. I did manage to hand in the vast majority, of course, using my big gamer APM, which comes from years and years of playing MMOs. You live and you learn, eh? And even during this first week after Phase 5 has dropped, records have most certainly been set. Many people had assumed plenty of servers would have had the gates open in the first week, and this is also certainly going to be happening now. Both the entire war effort, which includes all of these supplies by the way across the Horde and Alliance, was completed on day 1 in 14 hours, as well as the entire Scepter quest line in just under 1 day's worth of pure grind. Of course, both of these were done more or less by the type of guild you would have expected to have completed this on day 1. Practice, it turns out, does indeed make perfect. It's still very impressive accomplishment and feats of preparation and organisation wise, whatever you may think of the actual guilds themselves, you have to at least give them that. When I was doing my Phase 5 prep vids, I more or less thought the whole Scepter part of Phase 5 would have largely depended on whether many guilds played nicely, basically. And I'm talking about PvP servers here, of course. Whether they had enough numbers and organisation to get the Scepter quest line done fast, or whether it was going to be one big, sandy, grief fiesta. And that's what a lot of people were hoping for, to be quite honest. And in this regard, many servers have turned to full-on cross-faction cooperation, or as many people have more sinisterly tagged it, collusion. This is what makes Ape's Scepter more impressive, by the way. Suddenly all these people saying PvP on a PvP server, Dispelling's PvPing, Red is dead, have taken quite a dramatic 180 in their approach and are now holding hands with the opposite faction so they can all be happy and get a nice bug horse thing. Whether it was pre-agreed before the event began or you actually had to buy in as a guild to join the farming session, people are pulling any and every trick to make sure that they beat the competition. And just with many other big grinds in Classic, which aren't exactly the most fun, looking at you rank 14, it's also time-gated. Once the war effort is complete, you can fully assume that the gong will be near insta-rung by a player with a scepter on your server. This will happen at the start of the following reset after the initial launch of Phase 5. People are doing things including the following: same faction griefing by mind-controlling enemies and healing them to full, polymorphing players on the opposite faction to heal them to full, ignoring PvP members of guilds that are not inside the coalition, pulling guards from Cenarian Hold on top of players engaged in PvP who will then aggro on them and kill them, killing quest givers for the Scepter questline inside Cenarian Hold, stopping Scepter questline progress in Moonglade through similar means. The Moonglade part is extremely griefable. Camping quest hand-in locations to prevent progress, mass reporting suspected Scarab Lords on the opposite faction to get them auto-banned. Yes, this has actually happened. Camping, killing Flight Masters, the list literally goes on and on and on. Classic WoW, as I'm sure you know, is extremely griefable. A bunch of these can be done on PvE as well, though generally those realms are a bit more chill to play on. Honestly, as somebody just looking in on all of this now, you just kind of have to laugh at it all. Oh, and then there's people actually buying Scarab Lord. When I say people, I mean mages, of course. No other class can farm the 50,000 plus gold required to buy the 42k carapace fragments needed. They are even going for 2G a pop on some servers. This is Classic showing its age as a real MMORPG down to the core. Very little restrictions, people can absolutely get in positions of power in a game and lord over others. The game does very little to actually stop any form of griefing from taking place. That's MMOs though, I guess, and the players make them what they are. It's a game within a game. That's why some people love Classic so much. It's kind of like a toxic safe space. It's the Wild West. There's no catering or pandering, and people really get off on that. And now, I know all this sounds kind of wild, but this is really a very small percentage of players who act like this. And not every server has this level of sweat. For most people, it's a nice rejuvenation of world PvP or just open world activity and something to do and get involved in that isn't just raid log, farm gold, or PvP. But needless to say, a lot of people are getting pretty mad at what guilds are doing at the moment, especially the cross-faction stuff, with calls for collusion to be bannable and that the cross-faction way is not the classic way and that Blizzard should be stepping in. But should they? I mean, from a roleplay standpoint on the whole event, it's a war effort. A cross-faction war effort. There's even an NPC in Ironforge and Orgrimmar from the opposite faction to tell you where they're up to progress-wise. I mean, it seems like you're meant to work together almost. The AQ war effort is like the OG of suddenly factions must put aside their differences and fight together against a common enemy that threatens the world type of deal. Sort of like the, entire storyline of Wrath of the Lich King, or Cataclysm, or Mr. Pandaria, or Warlords of Draenor, or Legion. But hey, at least BFA brought us back around to the good old faction-based style. Wait, never mind, there's an old god, let's all be friends again. Old god conflict and Horde plus Alliance being best buddies suddenly. Name a more iconic duo. For a game centered around a faction-based system, we spend a lot of time working together. Maybe we're the bad guys. Anyways, as I was saying, I think that there is certainly a section of people who had it built up in their mind that they were capable of earning the scepter, and that this time around they were going to be a Scarab Lord and have the mount, and then it came to crunch time and it became almost immediately apparent that they had absolutely no chance at all. If you weren't in the know from months and months ago, perhaps even as far back as the start of Classic, if you couldn't have told me what the questline was then, you almost had next to no chance. You don't just hop on and get Scarab Lord, you need a literal army at your side, especially with how competitive every top guild is these days. And as with pretty much everything top-ending Classic, the real difficulty is not just the preparation, the burden of knowledge, the elitism, it's the politics. Getting in the know with the right crowd. This is the hardest part. There are so many incredibly toxic people in Classic who get away with stuff because people assume that it's just par for course to reach their goal and that they have to put up with them because they are the kind of person who will drop everything in their life and grind for 24 hours if they need to. Just look at the rank 14 grind for the last few ranks. You must make sure you can get a high bracket spot. And now the Scepter grind is no different really. If you didn't get the memo and hop on board the winning side on your server, that's it really for you. And sometimes the winning side are total scum and frankly should not be able to get away with half of the stuff that they do, but they do, because, as I say, Classic is very griefable and attracts some of the worst type of people I have ever seen in any game. It's like large-scale League of Legends, and then you have to play with these people day in, day out. There are good guys in there too, don't get me wrong, but sometimes they get mixed in with the bad and feel they have to stick it out because many of the big goals in Classic are time-gated and they fall prey to the insanity of the lost time fallacy of purple items or a bug that you can ride about. So that was a bit of a tangent if I've ever done one. I also wanted to talk about my thoughts on collusion between factions as, understandably, it can be quite tiring to do, well, anything in Silithus whilst all this nonsense is going on, even if you aren't just there to kill bugs or quest or whatever it may be. Many people say that it is against World of Warcraft's terms of service. First of all, WoW doesn't have terms of service. There is an EULA, or End User License Agreement, which basically says you don't own anything and don't try to change the game files. And then there is the Code of Conduct, which applies to all Blizzard games. I feel like we have to look at this all the time now. Anyways, here it is again. I'm sure I've read this bit to you before. Behaviour. So behaviour that intentionally detracts from others' enjoyment, such as griefing, throwing, feeding, etc., is unacceptable. We expect our players to treat each other with respect and promote an enjoyable environment. Acceptable behaviour is determined by player reports and Blizzard's decision, and violating these guidelines will result in account and gameplay restrictions. Could collusion fall into this category? Yes, I believe it could. Does it? Well, just like it says, it depends. It's down to Blizzard's decision. This isn't something they can hotfix out, though there is plenty of evidence flying about on Reddit and YouTube for now as to what extent people are colluding between the factions. This even reminds me of the same faction griefing on world bosses like Emrys or Kazakh, both of which are griefable by just dying and causing problems. I don't remember seeing any news on bans for that, though I could be wrong. You'll have to let me know. If Blizzard doesn't take action, collude away is how I see it, though having the burden suddenly sprung on players of what is overstepping the line is kind of a poor solution, but hey, what can you do? And it looks for me like I'm not going to be setting foot in AQ on the first reset, which I didn't expect being on Gehenna's, but that's okay really. It's open when it's open, as far as I'm concerned. How's your server looking? As far as I've seen, there's been a lot more sweaty drama, as far as I can tell, on NA compared to EU. which isn't usually the case. Hit me up below with your stories and Phase 5 drama, and take it easy. It is a game at the end of the day. As always, I do hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one very soon. If you like what you see, do give the video a like and subscribe, as there will be plenty more to come. Take care, guys, and I'll see you in the next one very soon. Hello ladies and gentlemen, Willie here. I've had this idea for a little while and it was brought up in the comments recently. Thanks for doing that, by the way. Always like when you guys let me know what you would find interesting. But since Classic has come out, players have found more than one or two ways to abuse the way this old game works. On top of that, so many discoveries have been made about things nobody thought would work that way until they were somehow figured out. In addition to this, some things were expected to work in certain ways and, well, turned out not quite to do so after all. Blizzard had a job of deciding what is too good to leave in the game and what should be allowed. So today let's jump in and check out 10 of the biggest player discoveries that Blizzard have decided to nerf. Oh, and by the way, I'm going to do that YouTuber thing now and say if you aren't subscribed, why not press the subscribe button? I don't know about you guys, but I seem to find myself finding some recommended channels all the time and just forgetting to hit that subscribe button. Doing so and dropping a like really does help me out, so I'd appreciate that. Let's go then. So number one, the Goreshack XP farm nerf. A classic case of clever use of game mechanics here. This, as far as I'm aware, have been in the game since day one, and I'm able to find footage of it as early as late December 2019, which was about 1 month after release. Suffice to say, word had spread pretty quickly about this farm and how easy it is to pull off. Add on top of this, so many players still leveling at this point, and you didn't need to pay or boost your way through in order to be able to do this, and it became incredibly popular. So, how was it done then? Simple. As part of the Rescuing Moira quest in Blackrock Depths, you have to talk to Commander Goreshack in the jail area for the What's Going On quest, and after you start it, 6 guards spawn shortly after and attack you. AoE them down, abandon the quest, take it again, another 6 spawn, kill them off, repeat. That's the Goreshack XP farm. It appears to have been nerfed only as of about 1 or so month ago, with the mobs that spawn no longer grant XP or drop loot. Why was it a nerf then? I don't think Blizzard liked the idea that you could endlessly spawn elite mobs and AoE them down. At least with boosting, there is a degree of skill and limitations via instance resets. Secondly, and I expect this to be the big reason, it was Horde only. The Alliance actually has a similar quest in BRD where 6 guards spawn from the infamous Jailbreak quest, which is part of the Elixir attunement, but after you defeat them you go on a massive patrol that's non-optional around the area, and Alliance can't just drop the quest and re-accept it, and if the mob you're escorting dies, you have to reset the whole instance, so it just isn't an option. Number 2, the Landslide Elemental Earth farm, another that had supposedly been in since day one, and was nerfed only about 1 week ago now, and from what I hear this had been somewhat known about for a while, but didn't start to get very popular until about 1 or so month ago, especially when people just started live streaming it as well. The word spreads pretty fast if you do that. Here is what you needed to do. Zone into Maradon with a Scepter of Celebras to get straight to Earthsong Falls, the final area of Mara, and then there were a few ways you could go about killing it from then onwards, resetting as a paladin, kiting as a warlock or any other class which could regen enough health. If you were kiting, you needed to lower the health of the boss to about 20% or so health, so we got a movement speed penalty. What the boss occasionally does is an ability called Earthquake, which stuns you for 6 seconds and spawns 4 Theradrim Shardlings. It's pretty much as simple as don't die, let the boss spawn the adds, kill them, and then collect Solid Stone and Elemental Earth. And with AQ coming up, Elemental Earth for greater nature protection potions and Solid Stone for sappers are both in plentiful demand. So why was it nerfed? Because mages can't do it, of course. ZG and ZF pathing is all good though, or something I imagine. For real though, it was likely the same reason as Goreshack. Endlessly spawning mobs in one reset. You could go for hours and hours up until your bags were full and gear was broken before you ever really needed to leave. Number 3, Blade of Eternal Darkness aggro in raids. This is a really interesting one, a controversial one, and one that was more or less instantly nerfed when it came to light. Another thing that's been in supposedly since day one, but was only more recently, as far as we're aware, used by top guilds in the world, in speedruns. So, Blade of Eternal Darkness drops from Princess Theradras in Mara, super low drop chance, less than 1%. It has a proc that does damage and restores mana. Now, it's supposed to only proc when damage is done. However, some players found it was proccing incorrectly from the Mind Vision spell, Though the proc went off, it didn't actually do damage, as you can see from some logs here. And since Mind Vision has a massive range, guilds could zone into Blackwing Lair, do /tar Seether, and then spam Mind Vision till the dagger procs. The trash packs would then run down through the gates into Razorgor's room before they had even started the actual Razorgor fight, thus making the forced combat sequence you have to break all the eggs during the Razorgor fight much more time efficient, because they were able to use that time to take out packs that would have been between them and the suppression room. This, as per Blizzard, was actually correct as per the 1.12 reference client, but it had to be nerfed since it would have set a standard that had to be met by any competitive guild speedrunning, and was pretty clearly an unintended interaction. Number 4, Lashes in Diamol East. Upon the news of Diamol coming out, every single gold making guide on the internet turned to lashes, lashes, lashes. These little planty boys in Diamol East were meant to be the next big great thing in gold making. It had certainly been the case on many private servers where players were all too frequently used to farming hundreds of gold an hour. On top of this, it's a very accessible farm for more or less every single class out there to varying degrees of success and speed. So when Diamol dropped and players did their first drop into Diamol East, it was quickly found out that the hype had been for naught, as lashes were nowhere near as good as expected to be for gold farming. Now, this wasn't necessarily a nerf on Blizzard's part, as far as we know. These drops are what matched their reference client, and private servers simply got it wrong and overbuffed them. Still, lashes aren't exactly terrible gold all the same. They're okay. There are better methods out there for most classes, but you can certainly work them into your Diamol East jump run routing on certain classes for a nice bit of extra gold for your time spent. Number 5, Zul'Gurub Enchants nerfed. Another one that's consistent with Blizzard's 1.12 reference client, and as far as I'm aware, this was also possible back in vanilla, but due to information spreading at a much less rapid pace, and frankly a lot less knowledge about the min-max back then, it wasn't really done. But it turned out shortly after ZG dropped that through trading and applying enchants, a player could effectively use their class enchant on another class's piece of gear. I understand that it was done through some clever macro usage. I couldn't find a clear example online of exactly what was needed to be done to replicate it. Maybe one of you guys can help shed a bit more light about that in the comments below. This is actually kind of a big deal for some classes, specifically the mage and the hunter enchants both have hit on them, which would have made them a very hot commodity. Almost every single caster wants spell hits at this point, especially warlocks. I know that feeling all too well, and despite the hunter one having only ranged attack power on it, I can tell you warriors would still want it for the hit over their more defensively set up enchant. Why was it nerfed then? I'm guessing it was an unintended interaction that would have become a meta. The enchants are specifically class tanked as well. Imagine mages getting another gold making method through selling ZG enchants. If this wasn't nerfed, this would have been a real thing for sure. Poor mages missing out on another gold making method, I guess. Number 6, Alterac Valley pre-mades on Alliance nerf. Well, when I say nerfed, it's more like they attempted to nerf it a few times. So I'm going to give you a real big TLDR here and say the PvP rewards for gear in Classic are from your rank. Your rank is determined by how much honor you earn per week. This means you are competing against other players on your faction to get the most honor possible to rise in the ranks and unlock the best gear. Simple enough, right? Well, that's the simple version of it. So on the dawn of Alterac Valley releasing, nerfed AV of course, but we knew about that for a long time before Classic launched, players quickly discovered ways where they could effectively all queue together, known as pre-mading, and at this point there was no way to queue as a group for Alterac Valley, it was all solo. But even during the first week, discords for AV pre-made started to pop up. Here's how it worked. You're all in a Discord lobby, you all time it so many players all queue at the same time. You have your battleground number show up on your screen, you type into Discord what battleground number you got, a Discord bot tallies up the numbers. If a good amount of players have the same number, you join. If you only have a few players, you drop the queue and repeat until you have ideally around half or more of the team from the pre-made, and these pre-mades would smash games in about 10 minutes flat. And because the honor system requires you to do the most efficient grinds to get the top spots, people were effectively forced to do this. In time, Blizzard removed the battleground number you get as a pop-up so that pre-mades would be blind as to whether they were in the same lobby, until a workaround was found within about a week to this, where players now joined games that were ending, dodged the queue, and could get pretty reliably put into a fresh battleground. Blizzard stealth nerfed this one by adding an arbitrary weight where it shuffles players into different battlegrounds. Also keep in mind that only Alliance could do this because they had instant queues. Even towards the start of AV, Horde had 20 to 40 minute queues, so it really wasn't a feasible thing for them to do. So why was it nerfed? Because it let Alliance win AV sometimes, of course. jokes aside, it was pretty clever stuff players were doing, but Blizzard didn't like them taking advantage of the queue system in this way to more or less ensure a win, even though you can still legitimately pre-made into AB or Warsong Gulch and win every game still. Classic PvP bounce, ladies and gentlemen. Let's move on, there's more PvP stuff to talk about. Number 7, Battleground exit portal removal from Warsong Gulch. So both the Horde and Alliance have an exit portal location for the Warsong Gulch Battleground, just behind where the graveyard is. What players were starting to do more and more was use mind control or other CC that cause random movement and loss of control of your character, like Fear or Death Coil, to essentially walk people out of the battleground. Not only did this remove an enemy player from the battleground, it also gave them the deserted debuff. It was pretty troll. I mean, people always troll in BGs. Bet you've seen a bunch of people at the start of battlegrounds make a portal and then say, click to help summon or something. It's like the good old Alt F4 to fix lag or whatever. This one did take a few weeks at least to be patched out, and Blizzard just straight up removed the exit portal, so now the only way to get out of Warsong Gulch is the /AFK. So why was it nerfed? I think this one takes the least explanation out of everything so far. I mean, there's trolling and then there's this. Go figure. Number 8, macros that had to be nerfed. 2 macros come to mind here that made the game better to play in some ways, but both were deemed too powerful. First of all, the max range nameplate macro. This command let you see target nameplates from about 40 or so yards away. It was extremely useful, especially as a ranged DPS player, and let you better assess threats from a distance. Unfortunately, Blizzard decided to stealth nerf this and set it down to a default of about 20 yards or so for seeing nameplates, which, as I'm sure you know, almost feels like mobs are in aggro range by the time you can actually see their nameplates. I'm pretty confident I can tell you exactly why this was nerfed, because it's a clear in-game advantage that only people who know about the macro can have. You know what? They nerfed max camera distance in retail for the exact same reason. It's so much closer than it used to be. It's unfortunate, but I'm pretty sure that's the reason why. The second macro that I can immediately think of is the Warrior Slam Spec macro. So this started to become popular around December 2019 or so. It was a simple enough macro that paused the auto attack swing timer instead of resetting it whilst Slam was cast. This actually made a new Warrior spec become more of a thing, especially on Horde where they have Wind Fury, though Alliance get Kings, so that's not too bad either. Blizzard ended up fixing the macro so that it was no longer paused during the swing timer. Instead, it reset it. This pretty much killed the spec overnight. Why was it nerfed then? Not really sure, to be honest. It wasn't overtaking dual wield Fury in PvE. In PvP, you have to stand still next to somebody, and Slam is affected by knockback, so it's kind of annoying to use, but you could, in theory, auto-attack Slam, Sword Spec, Hand of Justice, Mortal Strike and Wind Fury in the space of 1 second, which were global basically anybody. But let's be real, classic PvP is already bursty, and by the time we have AQ, and especially in Axe Gear, it's just going to be who can one-shot the other person the fastest. I think Blizzard just didn't like the possible future applications of this macro, so they took it out of the game. Number 9, set macros nerfed in Classic. Sort of. One other macro which a lot of people were looking forwards to was using /sit to your benefit. Well, I guess it's not explicitly a macro, but as I'm sure you know, if you're sitting, melee attacks will always crit on you. Some classes can actually take advantage of this as they have talents that benefit being crit, like Warriors in Rage, which is a massive plus 25% extra damage, or Paladin's Reckoning, which adds an extra attack to the next melee swing. But apparently this was not intended, and it's not in Classic, or it shouldn't be, that is. It's still possible, you just need to be in the standing up animation as you are hit. It's for sure a bit more precise than it used to be. I think we have spell batching to thank for this. Here you can see me sitting, getting crit, no enrage or blood rage, and then here's me standing just as I get hit, and I can proc it pretty consistently actually. This took all of 30 seconds of practice. Another reason to have a swing timer on your warrior right here. So why was it attempted to be nerfed? It was nerfed in 1.10 in vanilla. This post is actually a pretty interesting read. I'll link it below if you fancy a look. It gives a lot more insight on Reckoning as well. And number 10, nerfed add-ons. Let's finish up with 2 add-ons that were nerfed. Classic LFG. I mean, I can hardly believe this was ever a thing. It was developed prior to Classic's launch and basically aimed to emulate the group dungeon finder from retail. I'm not exactly a Classic purist, but I think there's some areas of the game that are different in Classic. Call them worse, inconvenient, whatever you like. It's part of how it was back then, and you just kind of have to accept that. Anyways, it was nerfed because people really kicked off about it, and understandably so, to be honest. One more add-on, and oh boy, was this add-on something that pretty much defined a whole phase. Remember this noise? Probably gave you some phase 2 PTSD right there. the Spy add-on. So what this did is pretty much tell you whenever an enemy player was nearby. It did this through reading entries in the combat log, which pre-nerf, and I tried to find the range exactly, but I couldn't. I'm going to say it felt about 100 yards or so. In any event, it was a massive range either way, and you instantly knew whether somebody was nearby. Extra fun points if you were a rogue or a druid, because Spy would catch you entering stealth or prowl, and inform everybody in practically the whole zone that you were nearby. You more or less had to have Spy during Phase 2 on a PvP server, because you could be hiding in the best spot ever, and people would find you in seconds like they had X-ray vision or something. It was reduced in time down to a 50-yard range, which still sounds like quite a lot, but it did make it a lot more tolerable. Why was it nerfed then? I mean, if a rogue enters stealth 100 yards away from you, and you can get that information from an add-on, and that doesn't sound totally broken to you, then I don't know what to say. There we go then, 10 or so examples of things that Blizzard thought were a bit too powerful to be in the game. I found this super interesting to look up. Most of these came to mind pretty much instantly as well. It's funny how our classic has evolved over time. I'm definitely up for doing another one of these for sure if you guys like it. So if you think I missed anything big, pop it down in the comments below. I'd love to hear about it. I do hope you guys enjoyed this one, and I'll see you in the next video very soon. If you like what you see, give the video a like and subscribe, as there'll be plenty more to come. Take care guys, and I'll see you all in the next one.
Like fantasy? You're gonna love this. Join forces with your friends and
bottleneck effects. You would have thought the opening of AQ would have provided some information on that. Maybe Blizzard just underestimated the player base once again, or maybe it wasn't even possible with technology back then to release the expansion in this fashion and avoid this bottleneck. In any event, it certainly made it memorable, perhaps for the wrong reasons though. And you may think Blizzard would learn something from doing launches like this, and you would be right, until they sort of forgot this happened and did the exact same thing later on, but managed to make it even worse. But anyways, we're finally through that portal onto our brand new world. What did this world offer? Content galore. New challenges, new abilities, new... Did you just see that guy flying? Okay, this is going to be pretty awesome. Let's talk about what the Burning Crusade brought to the World of Warcraft series. Upon landing in Outland, initially players may have thought, how will this continent last us for the next few years? It is, after all, a major downgrade in size from Kalimdor and the Eastern Kingdoms that totaled around 40 zones collectively. Outland by itself has 7, but sometimes less can be more. Zone design was more full and fleshed out. The advent of quest hubs had really grown into the game. Each zone had a few areas where quests were picked up en masse, whereas in vanilla there was only a selection of places like this, such as Booty Bay, Thorium Point, or Marshall's Refuge. Gone were the days of finding quests where an NPC in Undercity will just ask you casually to pop over to get a mushroom from Lockmo Dan or somewhere incredibly remote and inconvenient. Outland was much more linear in its approach. The developers didn't expect you to hop frequently between different zones, but progress from one to the next. Hellfire Peninsula led to Zangarmarsh, which led to Terakar Forest, to Nagrand, and so on. And each zone really stood out from one another. They kinda had to. 40 zones in vanilla is great for making an epic world. You need to plan your journeys. It feels like you're embarking on something, like when you make that first trip down Stranglethorn Vale, or on the journey through wetlands to get to Ironforge. But there's just a lot of nothing, a lot of filler space where not a lot happens, kind of like real life. With 7 zones to play through in the Burning Crusade, this wasn't nearly as much the case. Comparatively, the world is packed. Nearly every zone has multiple instances or raids in it. Each zone is immediately distinguishable. The atmospheric effects, the skyboxes, colour schemes, all changing from one area to the next like night and day. The arid red of Hellfire Peninsula, remember this noise before a swift res run at all? The boggy greens and purples of Zangarmarsh, over to the green and vibrant fields of Nagrand, to the stricken and desolate Shadowmoon Valley. Some zones even going as far as to really promote a new feature of the expansion in flying, and some key farming spots, quest hubs, or even raids needed this skill to access for yourself. The terrain was used to fit the new content, and don't worry, we're going to be talking more about flying later, you can bet on that. And on this new world, we found ourselves with 2 new races, one for the Horde and one for the Alliance, the Blood Elves and the Dran?
Why does everyone have trouble with the name of our people? It sounds just like it is spelled.
Yeah, those guys. For once the Horde got a race that didn't have back issues, and the Alliance got one that was more than 4 feet tall. That's a win-win, I'd say. You know, there wasn't any race change functionality for Blizzard back during TBC, and if we were to get TBC following Classic, who's thinking this technology may suddenly be made available? Race changing through the shop wasn't a thing till mid-Wrath of the Lich King. Even still, I think the main attraction of these new races is the fact that faction-specific classes were now gone, something lost from Vanilla Shore. Blizzard did, however, try to keep some semblance of a difference between the two factions by giving them different spells. Horde Shaman got Bloodlust, and Alliance got Heroism. They both do the same thing here. One is red because Horde are red and angry, the other is some floaty hammer thingy. Alliance Paladins got Seal of Vengeance, which was a stacking damage over time effect. Horde Paladins got Seal of Blood, which dealt damage to yourself to increase your damage, basically. Guess what? Seal of Blood is way better, to the point where Retribution on Horde is pretty good. Retribution on Alliance is, good for raid buffs. Some private servers have even given Seal of Blood to Alliance Retribution Paladins, as it's such a big imbalance between the two factions. It very much is what it is, I'm afraid. Not only this, but we had a new profession enter the game, and honestly one that feels so core to the game you could have almost sworn it was part of vanilla: jewel crafting, adding a new level of intricacy to completing your ideal item set, and jewel crafting certainly went a long way to completing those hit and expertise cap. What's expertise, you ask? A new stat. Expertise rating would reduce the chance an enemy would dodge or parry an attack. However, it wasn't a percentage anymore as it was in vanilla. It had a number that could be changed by gear stats, talents, gems, racial bonuses, procs, and enemy level. All in all, it's something that changes for pretty much every class all the time. It's just a number you need to keep in mind, a bit just like hit chance. And as we leveled up, our characters got access to new abilities. Many even got a brand new ability every 2 levels, as well as extra ranks of their core spells. Some of the abilities brought in by TBC added a level of skill and gameplay. They set you apart from using them correctly. Here's just a few additions: Spell Steal for mages, Cloak of Shadows for rogues, Heroism for shaman, Spell Reflect for warriors. Not only that, every single talent tree in the game got a new end talent at 40 points. Mutilate for assassination rogues, Unstable Affliction for affliction warlocks, Totem of Wrath for elemental shaman, Summon Water Elemental for frost mages. The list goes on, and pretty much every single class got something awesome and fresh. And you know what the best bit about all this is? Classes were just that little bit more balanced than they were in vanilla. It wasn't just the case if you run up against X class you're going to die every single time. Sure, let's not get too rose-tinted here. Mage and rogues are still absolute monsters in 1v1s, warriors destroying groups, but specializations like Shadow Priests, Enhancement Shamans, Balanced Druids can actually play the game without running out of mana in about 20 seconds. Healers started working their way into their niches, Paladins as tank healers, Shaman as incredibly strong group and raid healers, as were Priests, and Druids a little bit of a mix of both. And Blizzard implemented many group or raid-wide buffs to many specializations to make them more of an attractive option to bring along to your raid. Gone were the days of certain specs being a full meme. Retribution gained improved Seal of the Crusader, increasing the chance the target will be critically hit by 3%. Shadow Priest gained Vampiric Touch, giving your group a very strong mana regeneration buff. Enhancement got Unleash Rage, buffing your party's attack power by 10%. Moonkin Aura was buffed to 5%. I could go on, and all this new power was put to good use through the endgame content, of which there was an absolute load. Now let's talk raids. First of all, let's address the downsizing. Raids in vanilla were 40-man epic affairs, sure, but more an exercise for the most part in coordination and preparation than anything else. In the Burning Crusade, Karazhan was 10-man and every other raid was 25. In fact, not to go into this in too much detail again here, I've actually done a video on why I think Blizzard downscaled raids. Also, that pesky debuff cap was raised to 40, making it more of an attractive option to bring a wide variety of classes to help your raid out. The debuff cap wasn't fully dropped until Wrath of the Lich King. And we ended vanilla on Naxxramas, a sheer wall of pain for many guilds. Naxxramas wasn't just a step up from AQ, it was an escalator from the 1st to the 30th floor. Many guilds who even saw the inside of the place maybe only cleared 3 or 4 bosses in the easier quarters, the military and construct quarters having far too big of a barrier to entry in Resuvius and Patchwork. In the Burning Crusade, we had a whole lot of raids. Karazhan, arguably one of the most memorable ones ever for me, just how creative it was. No longer were we in some dungeon or dark, dank halls. This was a majestic tower clinging onto a past that had long surpassed it. A truly magical place. In fact, Karazhan was later reused in Legion as a 2-part dungeon. Bosses like Morose, the Curator, Opera Event, Chess, all ending in a battle against an Eridar Lord. We had small raids too, the likes of Magtheridon's Lair and Gruul's Lair, and then the likes of Tempest Keep, Ashes of Alar, the infamous Kael'thas fight with its roleplay, Serpent Shrine Cavern, Lady Vash, the Lurker Below, Black Temple, the Reliquary of Souls, Terran, what button do I press here guys? Gorefiend, Illidan Stormrage. These bosses weren't just big dumb dragons that if you over aggro one-shot your raid. Mechanics were introduced to encourage responsibility, positioning, cooldown usage, core elements of raiding moving forwards into the game. Once again, we ended on a difficulty spike. The Sunwell was unrelenting. Few raids even got past the first 3 of Caligos, Brutalis and Felmist, only to find the Eridar twins waiting, as well as one of the tightest DPS checks ever to have existed in Muru, where pretty much every raid member would go leatherworking to get Drums of Fury to rotate the buff for the whole fight. And finally we ended on Kill Jaden himself. But you didn't just walk into most of these raids. Oh no, you thought Attunements in Classic took a while. Think again. Let's go and get attuned to Karazhan, shall we? You will need to do the following. We've got 3 introductory quests, then we'll need to do Mana Tomb, Sethic Call, Shadow Labyrinth, Steamvault, Botanica, Mechanar, Arcatraz, Old Hillsbrad Foothills, and the Black Morass Dungeon before being attuned. And that's just for Karazhan, by the way. Here's a nice, simple graph of the different attunements in the Burning Crusade. You know what I like about this? Your main matters. When you log in, the chance you have something to work towards is very high, and you can put time into that one class, and if you're a real madman, you can do it all again on an alt. One dungeon leads to the next. Everything adds up. Reputations matter. Heroic dungeons matter. Raids lead to raids. It's all one big ladder up to the top, and it's a system that keeps you going and going. But PvE wasn't the only endgame that had grown. We got a new battleground as well, Eye of the Storm, which sort of reminds me as if Warsong Gulch and Arathi Basin had a baby, having elements of both capturing points and flag carrying. Have strong memories of priests and mages flying down with slow fall to the flag in the centre, and warriors happily running off losing half their health and then complaining about no heals. But the real highlight of PvP and TBC were arenas, a new far more competition driven form of PvP. Back then there were no rated battlegrounds. Sure, you could pre-made, but most of the time you actively don't want to go against other pre-mades to max your honour gains. Gear was still farmable and it was still very good, remember. Arena was the fire where PvP legends were forged. 2v2s, 3v3s and 5v5s. This was a place where people who wanted to PvP could PvP. The ranking and honour system from vanilla was set on fire and thrown into a bin, which was then set on fire and thrown into a bigger bin, which was then buried and then set on fire. TBC introduced a new system. Do PvP, get honour, spend it on gear. The most casual or most hardcore guys had the same access to the same gear. The guys at the top didn't just get to the top because they ran down to Drekvar for 12 hours a day, or because they could semi-AFK in Battlegrounds for months. They got to the top because they were good. They were really good. Meta comps will always be meta in any game, sure, but it gives you a chance to shine as an individual player. And ever since arenas have been a thing, they have always been the biggest indicator of who is the best, and there's a big reason why for that. With all that said and done, let's look at some of the things that have not been as positively received. Well, maybe not necessarily at the time of TBC, but certainly looking back, TBC introduced some gameplay elements and mechanics which have been widely criticised moving forwards. The age-old tale of I don't like instantly replacing my epics with quest greens. Now, personally, I don't mind a jump up in the items. It happens once every few years in this era, instead of every few months that it currently does in retail, but I'm not really all aboard that I'm replacing my epic strain. Let's look at some of the quests in Outland and compare it to what my Warlock is wearing today. I have that Azure Song Mageblade and the Exalted Book from AV, a nice combo going into Blackwing Lure, aka content from the start of the game. Now let's find a quest in TBC where I would replace these items. Spoiler, there is no quest in Hellfire Peninsula that would upgrade my items, or Zangarmarsh. We do have a candidate for a main hand replacement in Terracar Forest that's from a level 65 elite quest, and a definite upgrade from level 66 elite quest in Nagrand. Now, Azure Song Mageblade is a Molten Core item. It's a really good one, but it's a Molten Core item. Maybe I picked a bad slot to review, but looking over quests there are plenty of weapons being given out. If I have to wait till I complete halfway through Nagrand for an upgrade for a Molten Core epic, I'd say that's some pretty good mileage from that item, to be honest. And if you're in Nax gear, considering your tier sets and enchants, you're probably going to be using it right up to 70 where you start getting gear with multiple gem slots, so I don't really get this argument too much personally. The Burning Crusade brought daily quests into the game. Sure, there's something like that in Classic, but those are more repeatable rather than daily, so you can just do them as much as you want. However, in TBC we had Reputation dailies, the Isle of Quell de Nas eventually. You could see it as the start of much to come in terms of daily craft, and I think you can only have a negative opinion in retrospect. However, generally speaking, more of the content was by and large seen as a good thing back then, especially when it ended in epic rewards like the Nether Drakes from the Netherwing family, faction, or never Ray mounts from the Shatari Skyguard. On top of this, the sheer amount of content locked behind reputations, quest gains, and dungeons was massive. Heroic dungeon keys, raids, achievements, weeks of doing the same daily quests. This could be somewhat of a gripe, seeing as it's much of the same content again and again, and just as often the rewards were rare and highly sought after. The achievements could also be seen as a bit excessive and discouraging for anybody rolling alts, but at the same time, if there's so much to do on your main account, wouldn't it be better to focus on that than rather than going for an alt super fast? There was also the sheer difficulty jump from normal to heroic dungeons. Normal being reasonably chill for the most part, depends on the dungeon, designed for leveling players largely. Heroic though, oh boy, new mechanics, severely beefed up mobs, you needed CC, you absolutely had to bring CC. Sometimes you would have a pack of 5 mobs and would need to CC 4 of them. This did limit who exactly you could bring along to dungeons as well. I remember doing many runs of Magister's Terrace on my Shadow Priest after that trinket from the 3rd boss, and my role was to literally just mind control mobs. Doing this would do far more damage to help my group than I could ever do individually. The step up was worth the reward though, with bosses adding epics to their loot tables and Blizzard testing just how far they could push PvE content for the hardcore WoW players. Which finally brings us to flying. Ah yes, this can of worms. Talking about this is like LFR, everyone's already made up their mind at this point, and I think it can be incredibly polarising. Keep in mind though, at this time, flying was pretty amazing. You may think that in expansions to come, it's harmed the game in various ways, and we can talk about it more when we get to that point in the series, but in the Burning Crusade it was overall pretty well received. In fact, the real gripe with it back then was just the cost at the top end for epic flying. Regular flying was hardly going to break the bank for many players. The way riding skill was bought changed in the Burning Crusade as well. No longer was the skill cheap and the mount expensive, but the other way around. Regular flying being 800 gold and a mount 100 gold. This was 60% both land and air speed. Epic flying though was seriously expensive. The mount was 200 gold and the training was an enormous 5,000 gold. These mounts were 100% ground speed and 280% airspeed, making it a badge of prestige for a player to have earned that sum of money. Let's cover the criticism though you hear these days quickly. Killed world PvP. For the cost of 900 gold, you become near unkillable. As soon as you hop on that mount, most classes can no longer touch you. You can fly straight to instance entrances without having to fight your way there. Outnumbered? Fly away. Want to grief someone who doesn't have flying? It's very easy to do. I think many people have soured a bit towards the idea of world PvP since Phase 2 in Classic, to be honest, however good it may have been back in Vanilla. I don't think you can argue it didn't negatively impact people's ability to naturally interact with others. Secondly, it made the world seem smaller. Getting around was so much faster. You no longer needed to interact with the world around you as you zoom past everything to get to where you want to be. Get straight to that herb or mining node across bodies of water and so on. This was the biggest convenience factor Blizzard had ever introduced to the game. It made so much in the open world easier, and there was even content where it was required, from quests, farming spots and raids like Sketis, the Abyssal Shelf and Tempest Keep. There is good and bad in flying. Honestly, I don't really mind it. I've never been fussed in recent expansions when we start with only ground mounts before progressing to flying later on. Don't get me wrong, I see there's issues, but it's just a case of it is what it is for me. I'm actually planning a large discussion on this topic. I know it's so dividing, so this is a very condensed down version here. We will likely give this a bigger look later on down the line. All in all, the Burning Crusade brought a massive amount to the game, much needed balance, more full classes, expanding the endgame, new difficulty levels. It was overall an enormous success for Blizzard, and the player base went pretty wild for it. The Burning Crusade was near the peak of World of Warcraft's subscriber count, and was only ever surpassed by one expansion, and that would be the one to follow it. How could Blizzard go from strength to strength in this fashion? Well, we will look at that next time, as we find out, what did Wrath of the Lich King bring to the World of Warcraft series? These retrospectives are a very interesting trip down memory lane for me. Sometimes I'm surprised at how much comes back once you give it some thought. Anyways, that will do it for this episode. I'll see you guys in the next one. If you like what you see, give the video a like and subscribe, as there's plenty more to come. As always, thank you all so much for watching. Take care. Bye. There are two phrases that I remember from the Wrath of the Lich King era of World of Warcraft, and I kinda hate them both. Wrath of the Lich King was the expansion where casuals finally won, Wrath babies, and tell them only that the Lich King is dead, and the World of Warcraft died with him. Let's talk about how Wrath of the Lich King changed World of Warcraft. The lead up from the end of the Burning Crusade to Wrath was quite a long cycle, with the final major content patch of TBC being March 25th, 2008, and Wrath releasing November 13th, 2008. That's about 8 months if you were wondering. 8 months of the Isle of Quel'Danas, Sunwell and Magister's Terrace, which meant raiders had a whole lot of time to bash their heads against the difficulty curve of the Sunwell raid. Once again, Blizzard had done a nax. The last raid shot up how hard it was, making very few players able to see their way fully through. Blizzard even time-gated the last 3 bosses to release a few weeks apart. Perhaps they wanted to live assess how people performed on the first 3, perhaps they didn't want a major lore character like Kil'jaeden to be slapped down in a matter of days, which is what happened regardless actually. He became available on the 20th and was beat on the 25th of May. Either way, hard final tiers seemed to be the go-to. It was going to be 8 months till the next expansion, right? But it was too hard. Burnout, tiring of wiping on the same boss week after week, no progress. It caused a lot of guilds just to go into hibernation until next expansion was announced. Blizzard would struggle to hit that balance for raiding between fun, accessibility and difficulty for the entire expansion, as we'll talk about more later. But back to the release now. League season was in full swing, as had become the tradition pre any expansion. Speculation of what will come next was ripe as ever. Just where are we going to be going now? And it was late. Just straight up. The whole thing basically. Yeah, this was on the 1st of August too. Blizzard didn't do their own official announcement until September 15th. However, Blizzard had a little something extra that we didn't manage to find out through our little content leak. The second Scourge invasion and the zombie infestation. One of the most utterly chaotic events to ever happen in WoW's history. Probably not the best time to be talking about this, but we're going to do it anyway. This was the hype to end all hype for expansions. The Lich King was making an entrance into the game, and whether you were level 1 or 70, there was no escaping the Lich King's minions. Let me tell you how it all went down. Day 1. October 23rd. Conspicuous crates start to appear in Booty Bay, infecting players who come into contact with them. If after 10 minutes you aren't dispelled, you become a zombie and can spread the disease to yourself and you. Argent healers begin to appear to fight the zombies and dispel the disease, as can other players. Day 2, October 24th. The crates now appear in major cities. Plagued roaches roam the streets. Killing them leaves a disease cloud that further infects players. The disease now only lasts 5 minutes, down from 10. The infection itself is becoming harder to dispel, needing numerous casts. The tide of the Scourge is beginning to take hold. Day 3, October 25th. Mindless plagued NPCs roam lower level zones, attacking anything at random. The infection wasn't just targeting major cities, it was also reaching out to the rural areas. It was becoming clear that Azeroth was not prepared and that nowhere was safe. At 9 PM server time on October 25th, still day 3, all hell broke loose. Everything up to this point was just a warm-up. Now the real invasion begins. More Argent NPCs are added to major cities to fight back the Scourge, but their numbers only end up bolstering the forces of the enemy. Guards are turned to zombies after 1 minute of infection. Players are turned after 2 minutes. Argent healers are less common in major cities. The looming necropolis of the Scourge hang overhead, further spreading plague and destruction throughout the lands. More plague vermin and roaches infest main cities. At this point, Azeroth was on the brink. The tables had to be turned. Day 4, October 26th. Things, however, were going to get worse before they got better. How worse? Much worse. Players were turned into zombies after 1 minute. Argent healers had completely gone. The disease often needed 5 or 6 casts to successfully dispel. Plague vermin now infected guards, and players receive a whisper from a frozen shade telling them to give up all hope of fighting. At this point, the Scourge has complete control. Major cities are a no-go zone. Every NPC is a zombie, and if they aren't a zombie, they will be in about 1 minute. Players chase each other madly through the streets. Chaos reigns as the master plan of the Lich King consumes Azeroth. And then the next day a cure was found and it went away. Cool. This event was meant to go on for a few weeks, but you know, people complained and Blizzard acted. It was fun while it lasted, but I can't level, I can't buy consumables for raiding, the usual stuff. Perhaps the infection was a bit too effective, but you know what it did? It put the Scourge on the big screen. You could physically not play the game and failed to understand that something huge was going down. This event had such a legacy attached to it, and for good reason. It introduced us to one of the most powerful and influential beings ever to have existed in the game. The big bad guy on the box to end all big bad guys on the box. Arthas Menethil, the Lich King. Omnipotent and omnipresent. In expansions to come, Blizzard would try and replicate this main enemy, but it just didn't work, and Deathwing, well, we'll talk about that when we get to it. Knowing from day one of the expansion who the main focus is, had us hooked from the get-go. This was a character steeped in lore from the Warcraft RTS games, and you hardly had to be a lore nerd to think this guy was seriously cool. He appeared all over the place, questing, dungeons, raids. The commander of the Scourge was a constant threat, and the whole expansion built up to finally assaulting him in his frozen citadel. A whole raid tier was dedicated in a massive build-up to the assault on Icecrown. Since when do we get a raid, at least lore-wise, that is purely to prepare for a bigger raid? It was insane, and it all ended as expected. The whole payoff was fantastic, though it may have left some of us feeling a bit like Maiev after Illidan was defeated at the Black Temple, reaching the top of that mountain and asking, what now? What happens next? But you know what else the Lich King brought into the game? Death Knights, the first new class addition to World of Warcraft, the hero class, with their own starting zone, seeing how we break free of the Lich King's grasp and forge our own journey. That walk the first time for your capital booed, spat on, shamed, only to be granted clemency at your faction leader. Starting at level 55 and bombarded with abilities and talents, it was so easy to like the Death Knight. From the story-driven start, you were a warrior of death. You spread disease and pestilence at every step. Every single angst-ridden, edgy teen must have been over the moon about the thought of getting their hands on this beast of a class. I still remember Hellfire Peninsula day one doing a slashu and seeing all the names: DK Arthur's Death, Death and DK, Arthur's Killer X, DK Plague Arthur's Menethil, Arthur's DK Plague X. Good times. And aside from the class fantasy, Death Knights themselves were absolute monsters. There has never been a more insanely overpowered class compared to the state Death Knights were in on release. Now, Death Knights were designed with the idea that each specialisation should be able to tank or DPS, and it turns out when you do that, each spec, by default, needs adequate support from your baseline spells, in addition to talents to be actually functional at doing those things. This meant the Death Knight toolkit was so well-rounded and lacking in weaknesses that they were quite literally unstoppable. Oh, and they were also vastly overtuned damage-wise as well. Hero class, remember? Let's cover just a few of the more iconic spells as they were on release. Chains of Ice, cost 1 Frost Rune, 100% slow, degrading over 10 seconds. 100%. It was spammable. It had a 20 yards range. Icebound Fortitude, breaks all stuns and makes you immune to them. 50% damage reduction, 12-second duration, 1 minute cooldown. Anti-magic shield prevented all magical damage for its duration, completely uncapped, and it prevented the application of additional magical effects. And then we have some talents like Lichborn, 2 minute cooldown, become undead for 10 seconds, becoming immune to charm, fear and sleep effects. This is basically a better version of Will of the Forsaken. You could also heal yourself with Death Coil during this, which was a really fun interaction. I like that a lot. Anti-magic zone, 2 minute cooldown, AoE area, reducing spell damage by 75%. Glyph of Death and Decay, this one didn't last long. Give it a chance to horrify enemies in it for 2 seconds. It could repeatedly prog as an AoE ground effect. Get a load of this. The best bits have to be Raise Ally and the Shadow of Death. Let's say you're doing a 2v2 arena, okay? You're versus a Death Knight and a Druid. If you kill the Death Knight first, he gets to resurrect with Shadow of Death and keep fighting for 45 seconds. Actually still doing good damage, by the way. If you kill the Druid, the Death Knight can res him too. He gets to be a ghoul for 5 minutes. By the way, did you catch that I said in arena? Yes, you could do this in arena. It was insanely broken. Most of the crazy stuff didn't stick around for too long though and was patched out, but even by the end of the expansion, Death Knights were still very strong. Just in less of a, I'm gonna crush you in a 1v1 whilst being 10 levels lower than you kind of way. Enough about Death Knights though, we've only touched the surface of what this expansion offered. Let's check out the leveling experience. The expansion launch was pretty seamless overall. Blizzard learned their lesson from the Burning Crusade and gave players a choice whether to level in 2 different zones, both of which were at either end of the continent of Northrend, those being the Borean Tundra and the Howling Fjord. I'm just gonna say it, one of these choices is better than the other, you know which. Wrath questing was a step up from the Burning Crusade in certain ways. By and large, it was similarly formatted, quest hubs, numerous dungeon quests, the usual really. What was built upon in Wrath the Lich King for each zone was having a story that unfolded as you quest throughout it. This was a thing for certain quest hubs in TBC, but in Wrath the Lich King it was more fleshed out. The quest line around the Blue Drakes and Cold Dara Detta in the Borean Tundra, the whole questline in Zuldrak, taking Drakuru from being a prisoner to a champion of the Lich King, following along the Sons of Hodir and the Storm Giants in the Storm Peaks, and just the endgame questing in Icecrown, it was really good. And the world around us looked good too. You may say that some bits are a bit flat and bland, boring tundra, anyone? Dragonblight perhaps? It's supposed to be a frozen wasteland for the most part, isn't it? That's kind of what a tundra is, by the way. It wasn't all white and flat though. Sholazar Basin and the hunt for the elusive the cat thing, you know the one. Grizzly Hills with its colossal fallen trees, the Worgen Fret, and the shout out to the distant Shadowfang Keep and Aragol. The Jewel in the Sky Dalaran serving as our new main hub. The Storm Peaks. I could go on and on about this zone, but Wrath of the Lich King used flying to its advantage here. This zone was designed to be hit at a higher level once you had had the chance to unlock flying, and it was used in one of the most majestic and grand zones ever. This place is just fantastic. It looks fantastic, the soundtrack's fantastic. In fact, the soundtrack for Wrath of the Lich King as a whole is 10 out of 10. It's truly exceptional. You'll have heard it before, and I'm sure I'm going to echo it. The art and music teams are often the carries for World of Warcraft, as was the case here. In fact, the only real criticism I have is that Crystal Song Forest wasn't used a bit more frequently for questing, or just content in general beyond just picking carrots for that cooking daily. And our classes started hitting some crazy power spikes as we entered the later levels of Wrath of the Lich King. Let's cover the new bits before we look at the classes though. There were factors coming into the game which further pushed the power level of our characters. Just like the Burning Crusade, Wrath brought a new profession and new stats. The profession was Inscription. In Wrath, your glyphs mattered an enormous amount. In World of Warcraft, eventually they tried to phase out glyphs as something that were necessary, and eventually just made them small cosmetic effects. But the amount of glyphs that boosted your abilities considerably was huge. I could pick from a massive selection here, but just to give you a few ideas, we've got glyphs like Healing Stream Totem, Arcane Power, Starfire, Sprint, Death Grip, and so on. Glyphs mattered. On top of this, the Darkmoon cards from previous iterations of the game became linked with this profession, no longer just standalone drops you receive in the world. Stats that had existed in various forms of the game were made into more common occurrences, those being spell penetration and armor penetration, so much more common that you could really stack them on your gear. These would reduce either magical resistance or the armor of your target respectively, and were found on gear, gems, weapons, trinkets, talents, and so on. And stacking this stat did end up getting a little bit crazy towards the end of the expansion, where it was so readily available from so many sources. Having a decked out warrior casually bashing away as if you were wearing leather instead of plate didn't feel great on the receiving end. With that out of the way, let's talk classes. It was good. It was real good. Rotation started to get a bit more involved. Players' skill started to matter more and more in performing DPS wise, or in any role for that matter, and the new abilities that we got were some of the most memorable and core abilities ever to have been introduced. In fact, Wrath of the Lich King was the final expansion where talents would work under the 1 level equals 1 talent point system. It was done away with later on, and I'm sure we'll talk about it more when we cover Cataclysm and beyond, but even though Blizzard found space to add more spells, these weren't bad, useless, or forgettable spells by and large. Baseline, Shaman received Lava Burst, Hunter got Disengaged, which is one of my favourite abilities ever. Warriors got Heroic Leap. Talent-wise, we got new spells like Divine Storm for Rep Pallies, Blade Storm for Arms Warriors, Deep Freeze for Frost Mages, Penance for Disc Priests, Starfall for Balance Druids. If in the Burning Crusade classes started moving away from being memes, in Wrath of the Lich King, those same classes started to crush DPS meters and rise to the top. Retribution Paladins had the final laugh as they were buffed to become insanely powerful. They were actually crazy overpowered on release. Think about calling that Balance Druid an Oomkin, not before he blasts you out the raid with their damage. The same went for Feral, who I remember being absolutely savage in Ulduar. Shadow Priest and Enhance were also solid. The DPS game started to become much more about the player, solely than the class. Procs were introduced to many specializations to liven up the rotation a bit, mobility was added, interrupts were added, chances your class became just better was very high. Maybe this dissolves some sense of class uniqueness, but I don't remember a single warrior ever saying, no please take Heroic Leap away again, I'm just having too much fun. Wrath of the Lich King was where Blizzard started a much bigger focus on actually live tuning classes during major patches of the expansion, leading to people doing Flavour of the Month reroll. Even just thinking about this now, I haven't heard anyone say this in so long. The gearing path was so much faster and streamlined compared to previous expansions. You could get an ult ready to smash raids comparatively very quickly, and people really took advantage of that to play whatever was hitting the top of the meters from month to month. And yes, there's some criticism to be shared here, but I'll cover that later. In fact, I still have a massive amount to cover. Raids, more expansion features, PvP, as well as some of the criticisms that Wrath of the Lich King had and has looking forwards. And what I'm going to do is cover those in the next episode. This has already gone on for quite a while. I want to be able to stick to my upload goal. Hope you guys understand. So I will see you then. I do hope you enjoyed part 1 and that you'll stick around for part 2 and continue looking at how did Wrath of the Lich King change World of Warcraft. If you like what you see, give the video a like and subscribe as there's plenty more to come. As always, thank you all so much for watching. Take care. Bye. Hello ladies and gentlemen, Willie here. This is the second part of my look into how Wrath of the Lich King changed World of Warcraft as a whole. If you haven't, go and check out part 1 first. It covers a bunch of subjects that won't be in this video, just so I don't repeat myself. I'll link it down below. Also, consider dropping me a sub if you do enjoy the content, it really helps me out. Let's get into it then. We have a lot left to talk about: raids, more expansion features, and the negatives that you can take from Wrath of the Lich King. You know what Blizzard decided World of Warcraft was missing in Wrath? What we also desperately needed during our assault on the Scourge in the Frozen North? A feature that was pretty much pushed in every single area of the game that it could be? Vehicle combat! Woo! Strand of the Ancients, Wintergrasp, Eye of Eternity, the Oculus Dungeon, Flame Leviathan, as well as it being a more frequent occurrence during questing. Someone at Blizzard really liked the idea of vehicles when players historically don't. Not at all, really. It's one of those things like underwater content. It's a cool idea, it's worth trying, but most people already aren't going to like it regardless. Why? Because it's a change from the normal. Remember Terran Gorfine from Black Temple? That fight where you got a couple extra action buttons and some people just lost their mind? Same deal here. People mostly just like their class and how their class plays, even if the buttons on the vehicle are as single target attack and AoE attack, let alone adding some complexity. I remember people avoiding the Oculus dungeon like the plague during Wrath of the Lich King, and I never really understood it. Always remember just taking a couple red drakes and a green one, and you could blast through it in about 10 minutes. In fact, it ended up being one of the shortest dungeons there was. Vehicle combat was pushed super hard in Wrath of the Lich King, and I never really remembered too much praise for it myself. I wasn't really jumping at the thought of hopping into a vehicle instead of just playing my class, but if someone had to do it, sure, I'll do it. Anywho, speaking of dungeons, they changed big time from TBC. In the Burning Crusade we had normal and heroic dungeons. Now the normals, just as they were in Wrath of the Lich King, were more for levelling than anything else. The heroics were for starter level endgame gear. The TBC heroics were brutal and also needed a key or an attunement to be done before you were able to get inside. The Wrath of the Lich King heroics were a joke difficulty wise. You really had to mess up in order to cause a wipe. Blizzard had toned down the dungeons to such a massive extent. I remember the 3 dungeons released later on in the expansion, being the Pit of Sauron, Forge of Souls and Halls of Reflection, actually having a decent spike in difficulty comparatively, but the early ones, a far cry from the difficulty that used to be associated with the word heroic. Perhaps dungeons though had to be easier due to another expansion feature, and undoubtedly one of the most criticised ones at that. You may know what I'm talking about, and we're going to save that one for a bit later on, okay? But by and large, I still liked the dungeons, especially how they often lined up with questing as an end of zone goal with a bunch of quests in there. Apart from that one event in the Halls of Stone with Bran Bronzebeard, whatever happened to him, by the way? That took forever. That one was the worst. Other than that, dungeons, good. Which brings us to raids, often the best part of any expansion in my opinion, reason why so many of us have gotten into WoW over the years. And I suppose I should mention that raiding was split in Wrath of the Lich King. In BC it was 10-man Kara and ZA and 25 in all other raids. Wrath introduced 10 and 25-man raiding, both on separate lockouts. Many 10-man guilds started to pop up all over the place. Organising 10 people is just easier than 25 after all, but this created a divide. Why would you even do a 25-man raid when 10 is so much more accessible? Loot. Better loot is why, and the 25-mans could easily drop into a 10-man and separate their groups to double the amount of loot they could get per week, whereas the 10-man guilds pretty much always had to pug if they wanted that step up. This was another attempt by Blizzard just to get more people into raiding and make it accessible. I'm going to be using that word a lot, by the way, because Wrath introduced many aspects to support it. This would be one of the key complaints of the 10-man raids going forwards. They just couldn't get as good gear. Well, it would be until eventually Mr. Pandaria, Blizzard revamped the system as a whole, giving us flexible, normal and heroic, and then mythic. Raids in Wrath of the Lich King, as touched in on part 1 of this look back, were turbulent, shall we say. Each new tier went through a change in how they worked. Blizzard wanted 2 things to be completed with raids this expansion. 1, for people to be actually able to see the raids as newer or less skilled players, and 2, for the top end players to have a challenge waiting for them. They wanted bosses to be rock solid walls that needed hours and hours, and hundreds of attempts to break down. This would be a labour spanning the whole expansion. Let's start with the first set of raids in Wrath of the Lich King. We had revamped Naxxramas, Eye of Eternity, and Sotharian's Lair. Okay, we had Vault of Archivon too, but did you ever even do that place in a non-pug? It was a loot pinata with more pinatas added on as we progressed through the expansion. Have a guess at what day the first kill on 25-man Kel'Thuzad was in Wrath of the Lich King. As a reminder, the expansion released on November 13th. Go on, pick something that sounds silly, just for the fun of it. Done? Well, if you said November 15th, you're correct. Yes, 2 days after Wrath is out, KT is down. 2 days. 2. How about Malygos and the Eye of Eternity, the aspect of magic himself? Also November 15th. Safarian? You already know, November 15th. The whole first raid tier was cleared in 2 days from launch. This was unprecedented. Blizzard turned the difficulty dial so far down it was insane, and these guilds were clearing places in quest screens still. Sure, they were great players, but in the days to come, dozens and dozens of additional guilds landed their first clears on all the content. It was clear it was just undertuned, and this was a big shocker for Blizzard, of course. Raiding is so key to WoW. If the top end players don't have a challenge, well, they're not really going to be sticking around for anything but PvP, and whilst this did allow newer players to get into raiding, it just wasn't a healthy balance overall. The issue of how we can keep both crowds happy started to crop up. And you may be saying, hold on now, the real difficulty in the early tiers were from all the achievements. Some of them were hard, sure, but the speed kill on Malygos, or bringing a few less players for Nax or Eye of Eternity, wasn't really much of a hurdle to overcome when the content itself was just undertuned. The Undying from Naxxramas, awesome achievement, but it really boiled down to Vesuvius first, go straight to Thaddeus, and then hope your mages don't troll on Sapphiron. Anyone had a dodgy connection or somewhat unreliable? Just have them stand out of the fight. You hardly needed a full squad to take this on. Sotharian's Lair 3 Drakes was the real deal though, especially early on in the expansion, I'll give you that, and was actually seen as one of the most challenging bits of content for the entirety of Wrath of the Lich King. Our next tier of raiding tried something new, and something that I feel might have been the solution to the problem of accessibility in raiding, but wasn't continued moving forwards, which I think is a real shame, and this raid was one of the most memorable and well-liked raids to ever exist in WoW. On April 15th, 2008, the gates of Ulduar opened, a Titan facility and the prison of an